correct, hang up now. And we're gonna wait for some people to show up. Actually, since we are live, Jeff, you want to check if we are streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube?
I'm checking, and it says we are streaming on both.
All right. Then we will do our fancy intro right now and play. Jeff, you're up.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone, to YBYR Rights, a weekly interdisciplinary discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In today's episode, number 35, we talk about your online persona and online addresses, like property, such as decentralized URLs or uniform resource locators, and domains, topics you might not be aware of. The real problem is you don't own your addresses or your identities. You could be disenfranchised. There are too many intermediaries. Let's look at some simple propositions. For instance, domain names, right? Well, domain names really map onto uniform resource locators, which map onto IP addresses. So when you go out and buy a domain name, you don't actually control much of anything. You can be turned off by the person who you bought the domain name from, and at lower levels, everything can be blocked so that you don't really own a whole lot of anything. And if we look a little bit further at things like the W3C's latest standard on decentralized identities, they don't quite address the problem as well as they might. To understand that a little bit more, let's talk quickly about decentralized identifiers. Ben Dickerson from the Daily Swig put it this way: individuals and organizations rely on identifiers such as phone numbers, email addresses, and usernames on social media. However, most identifiers are used and controlled by external authorities that decide who or what they refer to and when they can be revoked. Right? Decentralized identifiers, or DIDs, are a new type of identifier that can enable verifiable, decentralized digital identities. That's good, right? And these DIDs can refer to persons, organizations, things, data models, abstract identities, as determined by the DID controller, right? But maybe that's not quite a perfect fit. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. I'm Jeff Jokish. How do we describe me as an identifier? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I'm the founder of Privacy Plant, a vocal data privacy researcher. I live at the intersection of privacy and data about privacy. I'm here with my co-host, Christian K. Meyer, a managing partner at Sustany Capital. Chris runs a venture firm focused on blockchain solutions. As a former software developer and lawyer, he's been working on data rights, the future of money, and recreating reality consensus. Chris, tell us a little bit about that.
Hey, my friend, and today we have a great guest who's going to be much more knowledgeable than myself about these topics. I'm more on the high-level side and interested in getting the topology correct. And so my typical example that I've been using for months now and that we're not getting anywhere with is digital credentials, but they are more specifically not what people in the engineering space refer to as digital credential, but those that the government is starting to issue now, which is A, worrisome because they usually don't know what they're doing, and then B, an opportunity for people that do know what they're doing. And if you connect those two things with other technologies, so specifically the ones that Luke is working on, that offers us a great deal of options in terms of what we would like to see. Hence the name of the show, Your Bytes, Your Rights. We want you to own all of your digital dust. We want you to own it forever. We want you to own it in a sovereign way that no one can interfere with what you say, what you want to buy, who you want to donate to, and otherwise how you want to be called at even. So Luke is the head of, well, everything, I guess, for FIO, which is an interoperability protocol between wallets, and he's probably going to correct me 10 times on what I said. And we support the team. We think what they're doing is really, really awesome and extends over other ideas that people might have in the framework of decentralized addresses and decentralized domains, and very forward thinking. It's a long slog. Luke has been working on this for, tell us how long now?
Oh, geez, I guess it's been a few years. I started as a part-time consultant. I've been in the blockchain space for almost 10 years now. I guess January would be 10 years. And I started after I had a business for about 10 years. I sold that. I was like, let's go full-time into the crypto blockchain stuff in the beginning of 2018. And pretty shortly after that, I think it was officially ended 2018, I got brought into this project and eventually became the chief decentralization officer and then the chief managing director. And I was kind of like part-time only, I don't want another job. But I got looped in. It's just too important. We got to make crypto easier to use. And a big part of that is having an identity that's human readable, like Luke at Stokes, instead of some big crazy hash that no one understands. So Chris and Jeff, thanks for having me today. I appreciate being here.
That's so funny. That makes you the CDO.
I guess so. Yeah, the managing director is like, it's a Cayman nonprofit, so they have to have terminology for that. But I sincerely started part-time with the intention of remaining part-time. But kind of as I'm sure you know, our passions drag us into what our time and attention goes to. And the more I looked at the whole blockchain space and started thinking about, man, this is, fix the money, fix the world, free the markets, free the world. This all makes sense to me, but it's too damn hard. We can't actually have everyday people sending and receiving cryptocurrency because the user experience is horrible and there's no kind of sense of like, this is me. Like when I have my wallet, I know where my money is. It's in this is my wallet, this is part of me. And it gets into the identity conversation of how do you have self-sovereign control of the very most important thing, your time away from your family, where you put your time and attention, which is your resources. So I got passionate about this because I think about a blockchain is basically a tool for global nonviolent consensus. It's a mechanism for humans to agree on something without saying, whoever has the most aircraft carriers gets to determine what's true. Right. And so I look at this and say, okay, this is the blockchain thing, this is the future. But then we're human beings. We have to relate to it emotionally. We have to have this experience that isn't horrifying. And so thinking about how we make that easier, that's what PO Protocol is all about. And Chris, I appreciate you being involved for the number of years, being a big fan of what we're doing and supporting us as well.
Yeah, and I think for everybody that doesn't spend as much time as us in the space, we should break down the problem a little bit, right? Because a lot of people use certain, let's call it online identifier on a daily basis. And there are some things that have become more obvious to people, i.e. while you're spending a lot of time, let's call it on Facebook, and you're developing a certain online persona there that aggregates a lot of digital things. That might be photos, that might be discussions, that might be videos, that might be a whole lot of different things. But at the end of the day, you don't own anything of that, right? So you don't own your online persona. It goes into a database that's run by a for-profit company. And someone at that for-profit company could wake up in the morning and decide that you as an online persona in this particular instantiation is not worth propagating anymore. And they can just simply delete it. And there's basically little to no recourse at this point in time. And that's kind of now, I think, the more obvious thing. What's less obvious is that even other things that you take for granted, let's call it email addresses or domain addresses, and email addresses that are associated to domains. So yourname.com, if you ever registered that, or even if you're a business and you quote unquote registered that, you don't own that. You have limited usage rights to that are determined by a whole rigmarole of usage terms and conditions that are being set by ICANN, and then also set by ICANN is the largest domain registration system out there. And I was a board member at the European version of that back in the days, because we were the largest ISP at the time. So, but the point there is, it's something that people only start to appreciate and then suffer from if and when these rights are being taken away. And that could be something simple as Google deciding that this particular domain should just no longer show up. So we're going to remove you from your domain name service. Anyway, Jeff.
I actually have two relevant examples of exactly that. 2 weeks ago, my 13-year-old son, just his Gmail account just went away, just disappeared. And he's got, all these games that he plays, all these things that he created accounts with using that Google account. And it's gone. I think I know why. I may have been less than completely honest about his age because I didn't want to deal with all the drama of the laws for children online. And I think they had basically a zero tolerance policy that if they determine an account isn't being truthful, that they just remove it. And I've gone through all the steps that I could to try to recover his account, and it's basically hopeless. Yeah. And it's just one of those things where I started thinking about how many years have I had a Gmail account? Holy moly. I got one like in the very beginning when it was like early, when it actually was beta. You know how they said beta for years and years and years? And I just thought about what would that do to my life if my Gmail account just disappeared? Yeah. All my email, all my interactions with all these different accounts. And it really kind of brought that home. Another example was many decades ago, I was working at an organization where all of a sudden our website just disappeared. And it was a freak out moment. My boss had just gone off to Europe, and we figured out an old domain that we didn't use anymore lapsed. Someone else bought it up, figured out that they could register my boss's name on the old domain and then do a password recovery reset and basically transferred over our actual live domain and took it from us. And it was this huge drama. I had to go to the courthouse with the lawyers and all this stuff. And it was just a mess. And it was one of those things where even back then, I was like, this is so broken. And then later, blockchain came out. I'm like, private keys would have made this much easier.
Yeah. And then obviously now we have the somewhat famous example that the New York Times propagated, where an actual software engineer had something much worse happen to him, where they not only took away all of his Gmail associated accounts, his Gmail address, but also reported him to law enforcement because supposedly he was peddling child pornography when in fact he was just actually communicating with his child's doctor and sending that doctor photos of his child to treat something. And that had enormous effect on his real life. And again, it's like there's private entities that are, by virtue of technology, being given more law enforcement rights than law enforcement ever could want to have, right? And then they're being, on top of that, deputized, which is another topic we talk about a lot, to kind of a priori, meaning before crimes happen, spy on something. So in a way, I think of Google and Facebook as the, what's it called, the pre-crime unit. And
they are.
Yeah.
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. Right. So, and I think that has still not sunk in with the vast majority of the population that this is what it is. To me, and I'm very open about this, I think that Google and Facebook are criminal organizations, that they violate my rights and your rights on a minute-by-minute basis. They're doing something right now with my information that I never consented to, and that has potentially harmful externalities attached to it. But again, let's hone in on what we want to talk about, since we have Luke here today, and we really need that sign, Jeff, that says "end of rant."
I want to bring something up real quick, guys, because I think that a lot of people maybe think about the problems of losing their domain or losing their identity, but I don't know if people are looking forward enough about this particular problem, and that's reputation. We in the past have always lived our life in what I call meat space, right? And you could build a reputation in meat space, and people sort of knew who you were, and they started to understand who you were, and you got a reputation, right? However that accumulated. But we've always lived our life in what I call meat. It doesn't really work the same way in a digital space if we have all of these separate profiles, and you can sort of be anonymous here and pseudonymous there and a real person here, and you've got multiple accounts on different platforms. The reputation doesn't accumulate, right? And if your Twitter account all of a sudden goes away, a lot of that reputation potentially goes away. And I don't think we've really addressed that problem, right? there is no global reputation in the digital world for people. And that may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but it's not a thing that we're even talking about yet.
I think it's an excellent point. I've been involved from friends of mine doing things or advisory positions or different things of that nature related to identity, privacy, and reputation discussions, and projects and platforms. One of the things that I've and I've been thinking about this more lately, actually, because I haven't been posting there as much as I used to, but I got involved in the Steam blockchain, which is now the Hive blockchain, back in 2016, in the summer of 2016. And for the first time, it was a place where I thought, this could be my home on the internet. I could take my content, put it on a blockchain forever, immutable forever, and I have the private key to control whether I want to edit that or update that post or whatever I might want to do with that post. And on top of that, I get rewarded with the inflation of the voluntary inflation that's built into the system. So I'm getting tokens for my content. And I've been posting there, like I said, since 2016. And even now, and it's an interesting example because a billionaire came in, Justin Sun, tried to take over the blockchain, and there was drama with, CZ kind of being misled a little bit and him voting with, Binance tokens. And it was this big deal. It became a big deal in the blockchain space where there was this governance crisis on this blockchain. And the community fought back, and it was this beautiful little war. And we eventually kind of said, you know what, you do you, stop censoring our accounts, because they literally started censoring accounts and things of that nature. So we just took all of our account balances, all of our posts, took the whole blockchain and just moved over to Hive. And it was this right of free association to say, our reputation matters. We don't want to be associated with this takeover event that happened. And all the applications that care about their reputation came with us. And those who were like, well, it's not so bad, they stayed on Steam. We're like, fine, we don't want to associate with you anyway. If that's your ideological perspective, that you're okay with kind of like a single, personal database of one individual is kind of what it came down to, because they Sybil attacked, which means they had one proxy account that had basically 20 fake sock puppet accounts pretending to be individuals, but they were all the same person. And they controlled the whole entire thing. And so it wasn't decentralized anymore. And so thinking about having a home base like Hive, to me, it's provided so much peace and security to my mindset that if my Facebook just goes away, which again, I've been posting there since Facebook basically started, I always know that I have this blockchain immutable record where my lot of my posts and blogs and contests, my philosophy of who I've been over the years, who I've evolved as, what projects I've been involved in, how I've helped other people reputationally in that regard. And so I want everyone to feel that. It feels so good just to be able to know that will always be there. Even if we get attacked by billionaires, that will always be there. And that's really kind of beautiful.
I was very big on the Google Plus platform.
Yes.
And I had so much content up there, right? Yeah. So many connections. I was probably in the top, 0.5% of all the people on that platform. Had like 40,000 followers.
And then it's just gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Who's Jeff Jokish? Nobody knows anymore.
Right. Luke, right? Do you want to tell people in very simple terms what FIO's objective is and what it does today?
Yeah, I'd love to. Essentially, we are trying to make the sending and receiving of cryptocurrency easier for everybody. We recognize that's a massive pain point and hindrance to global adoption of cryptocurrency. And we do that through essentially an NFT, a human readable address, Luke@Stokes as an example. It's a 2-part address. There's a domain part, which can be customized for your organization or your last name or whatever you might want it to be. And then there's kind of a username part. So the Luke@Stokes is a crypto handle that I can then, via my private key, set up any mappings I want. So I can have a public Bitcoin address or Ethereum address or any address. So any token, any chain, anything exists on there. But it's not just a wallet naming. We're also thinking about the usability, the user experience. So in everyday commerce, generally, someone requests payment from you. You eat a meal, they come with the bill, and you got to pay them the money. That doesn't happen in crypto. Crypto is send only. So we built a pretty amazing experience of a FIO request. And the request experience is essentially, I go and I say, hey, I'm going to send a request, or let's say I go to check out an e-commerce experience and I tell them my address is Luke@Stokes, and they tell me, well, we're going to be checkout at acme.com or whatever. I look at my wallet and it says, hey, here's the exact request, encrypted, Diffie-Hellman encrypted shared key between them and I, with a memo explaining what I'm buying, the exact amount. So, with Bitcoin, it could be like 0.002344765, it's got to be the exact amount of Bitcoin that their system's looking for, and including potentially a unique address with every transaction. And that can be encrypted in that FIO request. And so I see it, view it, say, that's good, swipe, done. So the idea that any type of interaction I'm having, they can request funds from me, I can review those, and I can respond to them. And what's important about that, and as it relates to identity and kind of your URL for how you find someone online, is this concept of the public key exchange. I think this is really important for our conversation today. Back in the day when people were doing PGP and they'd have these like key signing parties and stuff, you would go to a group of people in face-to-face and say, hey, here's my public key. If you ever want to send me an encrypted message, because we met in person, you now know that you can confidently use that public key and it's going to get to me and nobody else. We've lost that. People just randomly send Bitcoin addresses through, Twitter handles and text messages and email, and it's like the man in the middle attack, meaning someone could get in between you and the sender of the message to you and change that address. And then you have to like, hey, did you get it? You do a test send, all that kind of ridiculousness. With this, it's like, you go to my Twitter handle, it says Luke@Stokes, that's my crypto handle. And everyone who interacts with me will say, yeah, it's Luke@Stokes. If someone pretends to be me and says, hey, send me some crypto, if they don't send a field request from Luke@Stokes, you know they're a scammer. It's just obvious. So it's the idea that you can get a public key from someone easily that is only controlled by that person who controls the private key, and via something that's human readable, just Luke@Stokes. So that's kind of the first part of it. We have additional features such as NFT signatures, where you can have an NFT collection be validated as being owned by the artist. We've got some other different features coming down the road as well, such as like we've talked about multi-sig routing, how you can make that much easier. And again, it's all in that bucket of just making cryptocurrency sending and receiving easier. We're not currently doing a decentralized kind of DNS routing, which I know like ENS and Unstoppable Domain, some of these other ones are kind of getting into poking the bear of ICANN a little bit to try to do a decentralized address resolution for web browsers. We're not currently doing that. It is something that has been discussed in the community. And I think the main reason for that is that our focus, we really want to be on usability of crypto. Whether that evolves in the future, there's even talk of doing NFTs on the chain and many other things like that. And that's really kind of up to the community. The beautiful thing about how Field Protocol works is it is a decentralized autonomous organization. It kind of runs by the community, voted by the community. The board of directors, the steering committee, all the worker proposals, everything's transparent and seen. And we do zero with actual fiat. It's all crypto and has been since day one.
Yeah, and I posted the link to the FIO network into the notes on YouTube and LinkedIn. So if you want to register your free address, you can go there and register it today.
So Luke, tell our audience how is a FIO address mine more than if I was to go out and buy some other kind of an address?
Jeff, it's such a great question. And I think this kind of highlights the importance of why does any of this matter? On Monday, I'll be at Crypto Mondays here in Puerto Rico talking about just the philosophy of blockchain and crypto. And I'll get into some of this a little bit more. But it's the idea that when you have self-sovereign control of your store of value or your identity, it's a completely different game. There's no third-party risk. There's no way that someone else can just take it away from you, like my son experienced last week. And he was pretty devastated. He couldn't access his games that he had built, reputation and a profile on because his account was just gone and he didn't have the password, couldn't do a password reset. And so when you own a FIO crypto handle, and this kind of gets into the concept of NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens, essentially it's a one-of-one representation in the digital world of something that's unique. So there's only one of it. And when you could think of a public and private key pair as essentially a password. I have the password to access control over this digital item that's a one-of-one, meaning there's only one in the whole world. I could go and transfer it to someone else. I can manipulate it in certain ways, like I said, by adding new public key mappings or sending FIO requests or things like that. But it's really that kind of philosophical shift of I'm taking personal responsibility for how I exist in the digital world, and no one can take that away from me. It's permissionless. And once you control that private key and you own the assets that are associated to that private key, you have complete digital sovereignty. And I think that's really exciting. And I think it's right in alignment with the name of your show. It's your information that you control. And this is critically important for freedom, especially with where things are going. As we see more and more governments going completely digital, the introduction of central bank digital currencies as being a potential way they can do some surveillance on their citizens and spending. And there's some concerning trends that I'm seeing. And I think if we don't help people level up their education on the importance of digital sovereignty and controlling your own data, they're essentially just going to get taken advantage of. I just see it coming. I remember the early internet days. I was building websites in 1996 and stuff, and recognizing like there's a leveling up that takes place. You know, the CEO has his secretary print out emails only for so long. And then eventually it's like, look, you got to get on board, bro. You just have to. And so I think we're seeing a bit of that where more and more people are realizing, okay, I'm gonna play around with the, PayPal has a Bitcoin integration, or I can go to Coinbase and do something, and like slowly getting people's feet wet, and then eventually going, okay, there's a huge difference between your money's over there on Celsius and now it's gone, or actually getting a hardware wallet, getting the Edge wallet on your phone. They're a big VO partner, and actually sending it from a centralized location into a decentralized location, having a self-sovereign wallet to say, oh, hey, it's now in my control. And if I lose my phone, I've got my backup, passphrase so I can restore those private keys. All that stuff requires a leveling up of education, but also a simplification of the experience. And that's what we're trying to do with FIO, and a lot of great wallets trying to make it easier.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I always like to point out whenever you mention the word wallet, I think it's a little bit misleading. So what I mean by that specifically, wallets, and we internally call them runners, because the point there being is they interact with decentralized software solutions, blockchain being the most obvious example in this particular case, but they interact with digitally native things in a way that you retain ownership, and it's a usually peer-to-peer interaction where the communication is encrypted, because to me anything that we call cryptocurrencies or anything else is just an example of some form of communication with someone else, right? So money is just the language of value at the end of the day. So the point of that being is this is potentially one of the most important primitives, as in the combination of, let's call it your new username, your new persona in the digital world. And it's not going to be meta, and it's not going to be metaverse. This is all utter nonsense, but that's a side note. We're like decades away from that being a thing. But the thing that needs to exist is the actual World Wide Web, right? So people will hear me say this all the time. What you're using right now is not the World Wide Web, it's the commercial web. If you're on Google, you're a non-player character in a game called Google. And we need to leave that particular platform. We need to start leaving these particular platforms because they have imprisoned you without your knowledge. And it starts with realizing every time you use your email address, every time you're using an account-based system, you're using your Gmail address and use that as a username and password to log into some account. It could be your bank account, that could be your doctor's office, you want to download a report or anything else. You probably use that many times a day. You don't own that, right? So someone else owns essentially you. You have been pawned without your knowledge, and at any given point in time, the privileges that you enjoy can be just taken away for unknown reasons without recourse. But coming back to the wallet piece of that, so it's important to realize that this is an independent technology, if it's a non-custodial wallet specifically, that enables you to engage with the actual World Wide Web that we're building right now in a way that no one can censor you and can take these rights away. So that's why this is important to realize. Get a new censorship resistant address, right? And they are, by the way, they are not like the legacy wallet addresses by and large are being used wrong. What I mean by that specifically is if you read Satoshi's early writings, is you should actually never use an address twice.
Yeah.
Right? So it should only be used once for OPSEC reasons and otherwise censorship reasons. And whenever someone is doing that, he or she invalidates the herd immunity of that particular chain, not only for themselves, right? So they're also endangering other people by doing so. And so we have a long way to go to fix that. And unfortunately, it starts all with just acknowledging that this is a problem, right? So to realize that entities like Coinbase and otherwise commercial entities that in some shape or form interacting either with mining rewards, cryptocurrencies, quote unquote, a term that I don't appreciate really much, but the point being is if and when and where these associate cryptographic primitives, so private keys, addresses on the actual web. I call this the actual web. The actual web is a thing that is worldwide, So as in, it cannot be censored by a nation state and its goons. That's what you need, that's what you want, because, well, typically you will only find out that you need and what you wanted at the case when it's been taken away, unless you're already living in a situation, i.e. under an authoritarian government, that makes it a sport to use the legacy systems, database-driven solutions, to identify people that disagree with the goons' opinions that work at these governments. And that's and then again, stop rant after that is that's always important to do, by the way. Call to action. Don't ever say government does something. Don't ever say Google does something. Identify the individuals that are actually propagating these types of policy, taking these kind of actions, right? OFAC doesn't do anything. It's one particular individual or group of individuals we must identify, point to, and hold accountable. These are criminals. These are people that are violating human rights on a daily or second-by-second basis. Jeffrey.
That's really important. I was going to mention as well, we're talking about today's show mentions the Uniform Resource Identifier, the URL concept. And I was in a discussion today even about how the early version of the internet was supposed to have put and patch and post as these open messaging formats that anyone could do. The pages on the internet were going to be more like wikis, where I could go and update a document as opposed to just be a passive reader of the document. And there was going to be this incredible dynamic interaction. What was also interesting is the URIs that we would use would be permanent forever. That was the original intention, that if something got moved, you had this really detailed process of, oh, this is 301, 302, it's been removed, it's been moved over to here, but the URLs were supposed to be there forever. Like, this was universal resource, meaning there's the only one in the entire world, and it'll be there forever. You can trust it, you can build a reputation on it, all these types of things. There was supposed to be privacy built into the internet, there were supposed to be payment rails built in, and some people argue it kind of got subverted a little bit, and we went this other direction, just like you beautifully said, Chris. It's the corporate web. And I think that the idea of mesh networks, the idea of peer-to-peer networks, the idea of peer-to-peer messaging and peer-to-peer sending of value, I think is the path forward for how we actually rebuild a truly decentralized network.
Yeah, and we did our last show actually on the perma web, so we'll link it back in the show notes. Mm-hmm. So that's a super important topic, because we're still working on that. What's interesting is, to me, it's more like a note for you, is like Arweave seems to have hold on to that term. So the only thing outside of our show now that you'll find when you Google the term perma web is Arweave and YBYR now for some reason. So yes, you're totally right. It's been forgotten, and I would actually go stronger, as in that's the only thing that you can put the label World Wide Web on. Right? Mm-hmm. Because
we want to get to ownership, though, guys. Yeah. We want to own our own identity. If we want to own our own data, we have to stop being scared of doing that. And yes. I think a lot of people are still scared. If you look at crypto, right, there are still governance issues. People are scared of losing their passwords, right, and not being able to access their money. I think we still have some of that with identity, right? With what if I have root access, right? If I'm the sysadmin to my identity, to my money, and I forget my password, right, and I don't have a bank or somebody else to call to fix all my problems, what do I do, right? Do I want that responsibility? There's this great book that a lot of people know about, maybe a lot of people don't, from Eric Fromm, a prominent psychologist in the past century, called Escape from Freedom. It talks about our desire to I don't know, maybe enjoy fascism, right? To not want that freedom, to be able to actually control our destiny, right? And sometimes I think we want that a little bit internally, right? We want somebody else to do it all for us.
I want to read this book. I've been labeled a voluntarist. I've been labeled, these people that want to have all human interactions to be as voluntary as possible. And it's only in the last year or so that I've been challenged by some really intelligent friends who were kind of on a similar path to recognize what they would call human nature. And I get really frustrated by that kind of blanket term. But the main idea would be some people want to be ruled. They don't want to grow up and maintain the human adulthood required to not just look to mommy and daddy in the nanny state to take care of you. And that relates to not just government, but all forms of third-party counter control, our banking system. Like, there's just somebody we want to call to say, we have a problem and you're supposed to fix it for us. And I think you're raising a really important point that we have to kind of, and this is why recently I've been less involved in the day-to-day in a lot of the crypto projects I used to be involved in, because I'm kind of more studying consciousness and the evolution and development of human awareness, because I'm recognizing that you have to kind of do both together. You advance the technology, and the human kind of awareness, the zeitgeist of where people are at, is what I call like the layer zero, the number of human beings that believe in your project and believe it's valuable. That group of people and their collective kind of emergent property of understanding will determine what you can actually do. And I completely agree with you that there's a whole set of people that are most likely the large majority that are not willing to take on the personal responsibility required. And so I see the solution to be a combination of a lot of consciousness evolution, like people doing, there's a rise in people looking into meditation and even psychedelics and other different things that were usually previously over for those weird people. And now it's kind of like, wait, this is maybe something that can help me. A combination of personal responsibility as they grow that awareness, but then also on the other side is just improving usability. These things are very difficult and challenging because it's a bunch of tech bros, people making tools for other devs, and that's just not going to fly for the billions of users. We have to make it very simple. We use the mama, the grandma and the grandpa example often, but that really is important. I think it's a combination of those things: raising people's awareness, having them value personal responsibility through that raising of awareness, combined with, wow, it's just not nearly as hard as it used to be. And this is where social key recovery and other mechanisms like on the Hive blockchain, and this was also somewhat implemented in EOS, but particularly on Hive, you have this account recovery concept. And it's just worth exploring a little bit, where if someone hacked my account, I have another account that I can go to and I can tell the blockchain I got hacked. And that other account, I can call them up and say, hey, buddy, I need to call in the favor. You're my recovery account. And they can essentially reset on-chain my private key using a public key I provide to them, because there's this window of time where I can prove, hey, I used to have access to this account. I've lost it, but I want it frozen so I don't lose all my money. And I want to reset it. And there's actually an on-chain process for that on the Hive blockchain with their delegated proof of stake system. Those type of things, when I first saw that, I think it came out pretty early on, probably 2017, 2018. I was like, this is one of the most amazing innovations in blockchain tech. This should be on every single blockchain there is. And for whatever reason, it hasn't been rolled out beyond different projects that Dan Larimer has worked on. And so there are solutions. A big part of it is just education about them.
Wow, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I want to chime in on two things. So so the reason why I'm in the space, and for as long as I've been, so I wrote an outline 14 years ago on how to fix the web. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I've been working on for more than 14 years now, but I probably have another 20 years at least to go. But the larger point is to come back to what you said earlier. So what we're talking about here is human coordination technology. And what is really important to realize is that the continued success of our species, and the reason why you're seeing anything that you're seeing around you, anything that you're using right now, required us to cooperate. So if you wanted to make a pencil, there's a very famous book from the 30s that explains if you would want to make a pencil, it would take you your entire life and you'll probably not succeed. And so you take all these things for granted that are the result of human cooperation. Human cooperation started with collaboration. Collaboration, the difference here is that you have a mutual goal and you work on this together without being compensated for that, whereas cooperation is usually something that's incentivized. So that's why we invented what we call money, which is really currency, but that's a different show. So a larger point there being we broke that. So we broke human communication. And we broke it by introducing parasites into the middle, Google, Facebook, whoever is in the middle of that communication, who is able to hijack that communication and utilize it for its own motive. So increasing shareholder value, and then some subset KPIs, key performance indicators, that cater to that particular outcome, and which oftentimes will just take on something innocuous like wasting your time. Right? Time on site is a very important KPI for a lot of these entities, but then also the fact that I can just distort your communication. You're voicing something on Twitter, Facebook, somewhere else, and then I can A, amplify this, or B, mute that algorithmically, and then C, I can use that against you. As in, maybe I'll build this into my next algorithm because I know that you're perfectly against certain things in the world, and I can enrage you, and by virtue of enraging you, engage you and keep my time on site up high. And the extent to which this has broken reality is not at all acknowledged. And I would venture to say that these entities that are putting out these tools are very well aware of these externalities, and they should be held accountable. But ultimately, I have little hope that that's going to happen in any near-term future outside of us introducing technologies that are simply doing this better. So long story short is, unless we are recreating what I call reality consensus, the fact that we should be using these communication tools for us to not disagree, not to debate things that don't matter, whether or not you like blue buckets or red buckets. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to your survival. And if you make this a continuance or a prerequisite to your happiness, you're wasting your life. You have not been paying attention. You have been just utilized by a for-profit company to waste your time online and debate things that do not matter. Because guess what? If we keep doing this, you and I and everybody on this call will be dead in the very near future. And it's because we cannot agree on very obvious problems that all of us have together, that are our problems as a species. That starts with your thinking, quite obviously, then translates in your communication, and then ultimately results in some human interaction in the real world and meat space. And as of late, that hasn't been pretty. And again, I tend to do more rants these days, Jeff. So I think that's because I went to a conference where I heard more of the same yesterday. And I thought I was taking a trip to just Los Angeles. It ended up being time travel back to 2015, I think, approximately.
Are you sure it's not just old man yelling out window, you know?
Yeah, well, I wish it was the case. That was actually the problem. So it was a blockchain crowd, but apparently they got stuck in a time warp where they call things blockchain technology and things. It's like, blockchain technology has been around for a very long time as a particular type of encryption. If you're thinking that's an interesting technology, you are right, but you're not building a blockchain using blockchain technology necessarily. It's confusing the internet and using internet technology to do something. Again, that's unfortunately what we see a lot, right? I liken it to people accumulating 2x4s. Obviously, you can build houses using 2x4, so you can bash it against your head a lot. And I saw a lot of head bashing yet again, right?
So let's bring this back to something concrete, guys. So the web W3C standards body adopted decentralized identifiers as a standard back up a couple months ago. The community said yay. Google and Mozilla both said no, we don't think it's so great. I know, Chris, you're not a big fan. Luke, do you have an opinion on the DID standard?
When I first looked at the DID standards, I was confused. You know, I'm not a huge XML fan, or and all the good, just like all the JSON specs and all that kind of stuff. And I started digging into it. As a developer, I was kind of like, okay, but like, what exactly is it again? And the more I tried to picture myself, the more I tried to picture myself adding DIDs to any little project I was tinkering with of coding, the more I got confused. And obviously we've looked at it for, some type of relationship with BO protocol. Could Luke at Stokes, for example, just like you map to a Bitcoin address, could I choose to map it to a set of DIDs that have some type of meaning to me, or relational status, or profile, avatar type, information? And so I've certainly been thinking about it. My friend Craig Sellers, who does keychain.org, he's been thinking about it quite a bit from an identity perspective. He's one of the co-inventors of Tether, and there's Ruben Heck here in Puerto Rico as well with the Identity Foundation. So I'm having these conversations with these incredible thought leaders around the world about identity and digital identity in particular, and decentralized digital identities in particular even further. And so I think DIDs are it's the right conversation. We're definitely moving the right direction, and we do have to have something that people can agree to and say, hey, look, this is how we're going to do ourselves online. But I think I'm probably a lot like many. There's probably millions of developers, web hackers out there that are just kind of sitting there going, okay, well, tell me when this matters to me, and I think of it similar to like remember the Sparkle browsers and like when people were doing the semantic web and like it was this big, amazing thing and micro tags. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so beautiful. You're going to be able to do so many cool things. And I went to REST Fest for 4 or 5 years, I think it was, REST being the real Helios, hypermedia is the engine of application state. I'm talking geeking out for all the tech people that are into hypermedia applications. But like in those conversations, the authors of the books like that we were reading were there, and the guy who did the Richardson maturity model of REST was there, and we were having these conversations about, and I was seeing demos that just blew my mind. And I'm like, holy moly, we're going to have the whole world is going to be this incredible set of data that you can just wrap in URLs and pull in and do these incredible queries to know anything you want to know about anything. And the reality is here we are, a decade or so later, and it's kind of like, who's doing this, and so I kind of feel somewhat similar about DIDs. Like, is it going to be something that's just there sitting on the shelf that no one really understands, so no one does, and then they go and just kind of create their own spec because it's easier and they can communicate it to their team, and their team can code against the API and be up and running in a month or so. So yeah, I'm a little concerned with how complicated it is, but at the same time, I'm open to the idea that if you could wrap it with something like a Theo crypto handle and make it just simple to be like, I don't have to deal with the guts underneath, I just know it works, then yeah, it could work. If it truly is decentralized, it truly is self-sovereign, you don't have a situation where the larger players like Microsoft, Google's, Apple's of the world can kind of say, yeah, we're pretending it's decentralized, but we really get to make all the decisions. That's where I get a little concerned. Can it be captured? And that's where I think blockchain, specifically blockchain that has a cryptocurrency motivation that is rewarded to the validators who secure that immutable ledger, has some game theory dynamics that prevent those type of attacks. Because it's like, hey, if you want to take it over, like the case was with Steam and Hive, you have to come with more than $1 billion. You got to come more with money. You've got to own layer 0, the number of people who believe it's valuable, because it's actually decentralized. There's a distribution of those who care about what you're doing. And as long as DIDs and the standards for DIDs and all these kind of things remain actually decentralized, then I'm for it. Yep. It reminds me of I spent some time with the IEEE trying to do lexicon standards for blockchain industry, and it was like, month after month after month of meetings, and I was just like, I don't know that this is going to go anywhere. And it's unfortunate because it's like we do have to start somewhere. Somebody has to come up with something there. But I do agree. Right now, unfortunately, it is the governments, and they have that all-encompassing threat of violent force. And this is where this concept of democide, death by government, is always in the back of my mind for my motivations to be like, can we as a species cooperate and coordinate, as you were talking about earlier, not motivated by just fear of avoiding violent government. If I don't do it, they're going to literally put me in a cage. But instead, a rational self-interest of saying, hey, this is a problem. We all have to work on it together. And maybe we can do it in a way that benefits everybody. How do we help create a world that we all actually want to live in? And I think that can be a new way to think about moving forward and coming up with building that layer zero of people that are actually using something because it actually aligns with their values, their principles.
I think
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay, it should be fixed now. so people probably just saw my mouth move for the last 5 minutes, and someone has to fix it in post. Someone that's not me. Thank you, Jeff.
Great. So what I was going to say is I hope people realize that this is a bit of an existential threat, right? I mean, Chris said earlier, and I hope people agree that we're living in a web right now where we're non-player characters, right? I mean, it's the current commercial web. But if we don't solve decentralized identity in some way going forward quickly, Chris is right. The government's going to solve it for us, right? Or corporations, banks, and other big social media companies are going to solve it for us, and they're going to own our identities. And that's not a solution that we want. If we don't own our identities, the next version of the web is going to be worse than being non-player characters, because we're going to be player characters, but with no autonomy, right? And that's worse than where we are now.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem. I'm friends with Brittany Kaiser, who's out here in Puerto Rico as well. She's very actively in the Own Your Data movement and pushing for that around the world, doing policy and different things of that nature, nonprofit work. And there's also the discussion of like, what if you just be fully encrypted, have everything private, then you own it completely, and as soon as you put it out publicly, you don't own it anyway. This idea that property itself, ownership itself, which requires property, is a scarce, reliable resource. This idea that intellectual property, is that even a term that makes sense? Because it's just kind of like, well, you put it out there, anyone can grab it, and you still have your copy. It's not rivalrous, it's not scarce, right? So there's a lot of philosophical debates that people go back and forth on, like, should I encrypt everything? Should I not? And then when I think about my life and the things that have benefited me have been being radically transparent. There's another philosophy, is just put everything out there, assume everything's being watched 24/7, and then I get to control the narrative. If you Google my name, I control the 10 plus years of blogs and content. Now, I don't get to control the algorithm for what you exactly see, and that's definitely a problem, but it's much more difficult for someone to manufacture who Luke Stokes is online because I've been public. Whereas I have other friends who have been very, very private, and then they do want to say something, and it's very easy to discredit them because they can just create all this fake content that's not even really them and say, well, we're just going to discredit that person because look at all these terrible things they've done, which they haven't. And that is kind of another example where thinking through that balance between I want full encryption for when it matters and I want to protect myself, and I want the ability to admittedly, transparently say whatever I want and have that free speech ability where I get to control the narrative about me, and figuring out that the difference there. And the other side of it too is I pretty much sign up for every social media platform as it comes out. Like you said earlier, Google Circles, all that. I've always been on all those platforms, and I got pretty active on a number of them. And often, depending on the algorithms they use to make it interesting. Let's go back to the human nature of dopamine release, right? If I don't go to the platform and within 12 seconds get some high that makes me keep scrolling and clicking, I just go to something else. And this is just the unfortunate nature of the species. And so when I think about that, there are actual reasons to have algorithmic intention behind what is shown. And one thing that I've been playing with over the last decade or so is essentially training the algorithms to serve me. So when I look at my Facebook feed, and I actually have people that are like, man, I would have quit Facebook a long time ago, but I literally come just to your wall to engage in the conversations that you're having, because they're so philosophically deep and interesting. Because I've just kind of curated some interesting people that we like to discuss things. And so I think about it from the perspective of it's a tool. You can either break it's like a brick, you can break a window or build a house, like you were saying earlier with the 2x4. It is a tool. The AI algorithms are super scary and dangerous, and they can be turned against us at any point. We are the product. Let's not deceive ourselves. But at the same time, recognizing like, okay, what would a open AI algorithm that is known and in a way that can't be manipulated against us, but actually benefits us? Like I want my personal AI to filter my feed for me and show me the cool stuff that I'm excited about. I want to get that dopamine hit. I've got 12 minutes to spend, scrolling. I don't want to go have to work on finding some cool stuff, right? So it's an interesting challenge. It's not just like, hey, one-on-one conversation is the only way to go. We are going to have this town square idea that's going to have to be curated in some way.
Yeah, let me put a somewhat self-serving plug into this. So Jeff and I have been discussing this for quite some time now, and so we're going to put a program together, and we're inviting, how many did we decide on, Jeff? 8 companies to that, or 16? 16, right? We're going to invite 16 companies where we will approve their products. So that could be VPNs, that could be password managers, anything that we approve upon that we find useful to save people time, to save people's privacies, to make people more secure online. And so we're going to have a weekly hour-long seminar, essentially, where all of these companies for half an hour will just present their product, but it's going to be curated by us. And so the objective is that every person that's going through this kind of 4-week of program and actually implements those tools, because that's the common thread that we see here is, so people start purchasing that, but then it always requires some tooling at the end, and if you don't do that, you're missing out on most of the benefits, right? So but our hope is, and our calculation is, that you should save probably at least 20-30 minutes a day after you're done. So multiply this with the rest of your life. Right, so multiply that with whatever your life expectancy is, which in my case, I assume it's endless. So multiply it with that and assume that by doing these tooling, you will save 180 hours, right? So that you can spend in better ways. I'll give you one practical example that I kind of did for myself, just so it makes more sense. So when I open up YouTube, it's blank. I managed to set it up so that I'm not going to get spammed with all those like clickbait nonsense things that are kind of TikTok-y and want to click you on some car or something else that grabs people's attention that are profiled like me, and then for the next half an hour that goes by, you're actually scrolling through some feed that doesn't add any actual value to your life. And
those recommendations are pretty bad.
And just that, unfortunately, so we don't have the tooling yet, and actually this is kind of a call to action. It would be very useful to have this tooling as in, okay, I changed my behavior. Give me a report every week how much time I save. And to all the potential companies that want to be part of this journey, provide that tool to people. Provide that simple email once a week. Oh, by the way, this week, because you implement this tool, it saved you 30 hours of your life. Think about how you better spend this. It's with some loved one or working out or whatever actual healthy participation in your own life you're doing, rather than scrolling through some feed and doing some likes, or that's kind of the best case, or getting outraged by some happenings in the world that you don't have influence over. We are over the top of the hour. Before I play our outro, Jeff, do we have a topic for next week already?
I think we do, Chris. Okay. I believe we're going to talk about access management and password managers.
All right, and actually that's going to be the week after next week for the time being, because of Jeff and my time constraints, and until we have a half-time person here employed, we will only be able, unfortunately, to do it bi-weekly. But I promise we're working hard on getting sponsors to the show. If you want to identify yourself, please let us know. We only need a few bucks to pay for someone to take some of the load off here. And also, again, excuse that I turned myself off in the feed. We got complaints about that already. And that has all to do with me trying to do electronics here and software managing while talking, which I always do too fast, I know. So yes, password managers, super interesting topic. Yes, don't let Google be the master of your passwords. I think that if we learned anything in today's show, it's don't trust Google, and specifically don't trust Google with your authentication across all your systems, because you are asking for trouble for your future self. You don't want that.
Yep, absolutely. So until next week, thank you very much for being here, Luke Stokes, and everyone else, try to hold on to your life.